It was the summer of 2009, either June or July. I remember it was extremely hot outside because I was sitting on my hotel bed with that little air conditioner that's under the windows blasting away at me. And I was staring at my laptop. I had just entered a sell order for my primary investment account. Sell everything. And thankfully, the system asked me to confirm it. And I was staring at the confirmation page. And literally, I had my finger hovering over the enter button at various times for what was probably 10 or 15 minutes. And eventually, I slid the mouse over to cancel, hit cancel, turned off my computer, closed it, and went to bed. And I never again really ever came close to selling any portion of my portfolio, much less all of it. But in retrospect, it took me a number of years to really process that story and realize, well, first of all, it took me about a year to a year and a half to even realize that we had bottomed out at the beginning of March. 3 months prior to that, we had already bottomed out. We were already recovering. And one of the questions that we'll have in our question section today made me think of this story. And it connects to our main topic today, the 4 cornerstones, planning for the certainty of uncertainty, because it's at those moments when you're most uncertain, right? After the market is already turned around, after it's already bottomed out. I'm by no means suggesting that we're at that stage in this current market. We're likely a long way away from that. But we have no idea, and clients have no idea, and it is just a sea of uncertainty, even past the point at which it has already bottomed out and the market has started to recover. We will continue to feel uncertain. And so in those times, what can we rely on? Well, in our first 2 episodes, we've really been talking more about managing emotions, managing communications. So we wanted to get a little bit more into the nitty-gritty in this episode and give some more very specific content as to operational and process-driven ways to work with your clients in your planning process. So welcome to the Valuability Podcast, Episode 3, the 4 Cornerstones, Planning for the Certainty of Uncertainty. Valuability Podcast is for financial advisors, business owners, and anyone interested in financial planning, business, leadership, and personal development. My name is Danforth Fleek. I was a financial advisor and product wholesaler for 15 years. Before that, I was in compliance and operations, and I am joined each week by my longtime friend and mentor, Philip Simonson. Philip, welcome.
Thank you, Dan. And a little bit on my background. In the early 80s to mid 80s, I was an advisor and a field leader in the late 80s. Housed out of Dallas with my mentor, Jim Choate. God rest his soul. We took that region. There was 13 for, at that time, Amex. We were 12 out of 13. And I can tell you 12 was not good. But within 2.5 years later, we brought it up to number 1. And from there, then I was asked if I'd go over to England, set up a financial planning company for Amex. Did that through 90 to about 95. And then I joined up with our colleague and old friend Nate, and that's when I met you, Danforth, and we were with the Financial Network, and there had 30-some regions there. We took that region to one of the top 5 and number 1 within the financial institution division, and won the Chairman's Award 2 years in a row for increase in productivity year over year by region and by advisor. And then I was asked to sit on the operating committee of ING Advisors Network and set up their practice management business development unit for 8,000 advisors. Did that up to first decade. And then I don't say all that just to impress you, but impress upon you that I've had the ability to work with some of the best in this industry. And it's one of my values to create meaningful work and relationship by sharing the knowledge and skills. And of course, these tools will be starting here today, and we've been in the other episodes that I've acquired over 62 years around the sun.
Awesome. And for our podcast, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. We're up and running on all of those platforms. You can also find us on our YouTube channel. Search for Value-Ability on YouTube. And then, of course, our website, value-ability.com. Click on the episodes tab, and you can find all of our episodes there. Wherever you find us, like, review, subscribe, and share the eternal mantra of podcasters everywhere. And while you're on our website, sign up for our mailing list. It's at value-ability.com under the Contact Us tab. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Our accounts for both of those are at value_ability. Use Twitter to get in touch with us, and any visuals that we reference, we will post on our Instagram account. So with that, Philip, it was, I mentioned this to you the other day, but I think it's worthwhile repeating here that my whole career as a product wholesaler, I dealt with risk products. Mm-hmm. And of course, I would always theoretically talk about timing risk when it comes to retirement, and that poor soul who, after 40 years of working away and building his giant nest egg, decides to retire, and then the very next month, the market decides to take a giant crap and drop 20-25%. And that guy is you.
It is me. It actually was dropped 32%, but yeah.
Who's counting?
Who's counting, right? And we will, we're going to share some of those stories, and they're personal, and what have we learned from it. And the first thing that comes to my mind there, Danforth, is that it's Warren Buffett, the old sage on the stage or guide on the side. He had some, of course, has some great sayings, but the one that clicked with me right away when you're painting that picture was, when the tide goes out, you can certainly see who's been swimming naked. And I think I got caught swimming naked back in 90, the .com. So I'm going to be referencing that today. Two, I love the other one. During times like this, shares revert back to their rightful owners. Even though during the past 2 weeks, my portfolio did go down approximately 18%. So it did exactly what it was supposed to do, protect myself using an asset allocation mix. So I wouldn't mirror the other indices, protect myself on the downside. But I'm happy to say I did, through my advisor, because I don't manage my money anymore because I traveled so much, and then I got cancer. And so in case anything, the certainty of uncertainty happens to me, Lisa has someone she can work with. And that's my wife of, 35 years. So, and partner and best friend. So what I also then can say is bought Boeing. It looked like a hero. Bought it last week, and as of yesterday, it doubled. But I'm certain after this morning, it's gone down a little bit. It didn't double. It increased 100. I got 100% rate of return on it. So we're slowly making up. This is a great buying opportunity right now. That's what you wait for on the retail side. You don't buy I live in the tundra. You don't buy brand new snowmobiles in the fall. You buy them now. You don't buy the new cars coming out in the fall. You buy them, you wait. And so great buying opportunity.
Absolutely. So just to reiterate, find our supporting documents at value-ability.com. Click on the episodes tab. There will be a link there. And you can also find it on our Instagram account at value_ability. The piece that we're going to be walking through today is called the 4 Cornerstones, planning for the certainty of uncertainty. It is based on what Philip refers to as the smart money principles. Philip, why don't you jump in and start describing this piece for folks?
Sure. I think when I first learned this piece, it would have been back in the late 90s when I came back from the UK. And before I begin, let me just pause here. And if you're listening to us at home or at the office, grab a blank piece of paper and a pen. Otherwise, Dan, where else could they, I'll turn it over to you, where else could they get the supporting tool that I'll be referencing here?
Yep, either on the valuability.com website, value-ability.com. So click on the episodes tab. There'll be a link there to take you to the content, or check out the Instagram account at value_ability. And if you're driving, please don't try and access them. Wait till you get where you're going.
And when I ask you to visualize, keep your eyes open. And to my son Garrett, who always listens, while driving, Garrett, keep the eyes open here. All right. Now, let's look at the first cornerstone. And before you even invest, this is the one that Dan had referenced earlier, risk management. And it's protecting your number one asset, your ability to earn. So before you start investing in either fixed incomes or equities, make sure your dependents, particularly if you have dependents, are taken care of in regard to the lifestyle you want them to have in case you die prematurely. Because as we said, all of this is about planning for that certainty of uncertainty. And examples of that, well, we can all be certain we're going to die. We just don't know when. Some of us might become disabled. How are you going to replace that income if that occurs? We're all going to retire. We just don't know when. But then the big risk we run in retirement or uncertainty, will I ever run out of money? So I would suggest as advisors, one of our key roles is to help our clients plan for that certainty of uncertainty. And Dan, you referenced this one too, this first cornerstone. I think you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, look, it's really getting enough life insurance so that life insurance becomes your pension for your survivors.
Right. So, yeah, there's a number of things, right? It kind of transitions over time, right? So initially that risk management portion is going to cover, income loss to your spouse or partner and dependents, if you should die prematurely, to allow them to, pay off the mortgage, maybe put the dependents through school. But then as your dependents grow up and leave the house, it kind of transitions to that middle stage where it then is covering your pension replacement for your spouse, partner, where, hey, you get into your 50s, the kids are out of the house, and something happens to you. A lot of times that 50 to 65 age range is that prime earning period for retirement funding. And so you don't want to leave that spouse stranded, right before retirement. I've seen it, way too many times to be comfortable with it in my career, where a husband or wife is left alone in their 50s or early 60s just prior to or even right after retirement, and they haven't even finished in a lot of cases saving for retirement. And then the primary breadwinner is gone, and that income is gone, and they're left severely underfunded. Mm-hmm. So then as an advisor, you kind of, usually I've seen these situations where we've picked them up from another advisor because the previous advisor obviously didn't do their job and talk about protection, and then that surviving spouse gets frustrated with that and goes to seek other counsel. And at that point, there's not a whole heck of a lot you can do other than some damage control. But so yeah, it transitions through that point, and then you get into early retirement. And even then, if you have, say, good, affordable life insurance, then it can also help you with market downturns. So it kind of transitions over time, but yes, that risk management portion really covers that wide swath from say 40 to 65.
Very good. Thank you, Dan. And we'll actually have an episode on that. I call it The Great Life Insurance, The Great National Dilemma. And so more to come on that one. But that's your first cornerstone. Build that. And think of these cornerstones as if you're building a house. You got to have 4 solid cornerstones before you can start framing that house and building and putting the walls on and putting, and then the roof and making it solid. So this is the first cornerstone. Then the next piece I want to introduce to you, and if you again got that blank piece of paper, we're going to talk a little bit about asset allocation and the other 3 cornerstones. And the asset allocation model that I'm going to, some of you already know this, but I'll do a quick background. It was developed by Markowitz and Sharp, and they won the Nobel Prize in 91 or 92 for for this economic model, and they won it therefore in Nobel Prize in economics. And what it came out as is like 91.5% of your overall rate of return isn't based upon the individual stocks or timing the market, but the various asset classes that you have. And while one is going up, the other one's going down. So it's a disciplined approach when you rebalance as well. And asset classes could be small cap, could be large cap. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But interesting, though, a little side note, Markowitz in World War II, he was in the War Department. He was tasked to make sure he could get our troops and merchant ships across the Atlantic in the quickest amount of time with the least amount of risk. He was at a conference with Sharp, who was at MIT, and they shared a cab together. And Markowitz explained to him what he was doing. And Sharp, and thank you, the Pentium chip or the chip allowed them to go back in history and do all these, gather all these different historical facts and figure out how asset classes performed during different times of good markets, bad markets. So that's how it came about. Now, if you want, draw a vertical line and then a horizontal axis as well. On the vertical line, that's your rate of return. On the horizontal, you label that as risk. Down in the left-hand corner now, put 0, 0. And on the top, or you could put low, low, and then you could put high on the top of that vertical. That's your rate of return, that axis. And then on the horizontal axis, you're going to have over on the right-hand side, put high. And you could put, on the top, on the vertical, 12%. Over on the horizontal, on the lower right-hand corner, put 20 to 30%. That's the risk. Then what you can do, if you will, downwards, low, low, where they meet the vertical and, horizontal axis, draw a line going up to the top right-hand corner. And that's going to be your efficient frontier curve. And the efficient frontier curve, this is where, you're looking at the amount of risk you're willing to take for the amount of return you're willing to receive for that risk. And you're going to, the different asset classes are going to be along that line. So if you're down on the, lower left-hand corner and you're thinking about asset classes, well, and you got return, well, savings accounts, T-bills, they're going to be at the very bottom. Up on the top right-hand corner of that efficient frontier curve, that's going to be international funds, etc. And along the way, you're going to keep going up. You'll have CDs, you're going to have treasury bonds, you're going to have real estate, you're going to have growth income, you're going to have blue chips and small caps, and then you have international. I'm sure I'm missing a few, but you get the picture. Now, as you think about this efficient frontier curve and this asset allocation model, what down below or underneath the efficient frontier curve line that we had you draw, I would write in for clients, I'd just put portfolio A, portfolio B, and C. And I would just circle A, B, and C and then say, hey, these are different portfolios. And then I'd ask the client or potential client, what's wrong with these portfolios? And Dan, what do you think they said?
Well, from my own experience, I know many clients just stare at you blankly, but some of them do figure out that the problem with it is that it's not on the most efficient portfolio, right?
Yeah.
It's taking too much risk for too little return, essentially.
Thank you. And that old saying, the picture's worth 1,000 words. So then what I do is I take a line. If you got the horizontal axis there, I take my pen and I drop wherever the A or B or C is, and I start at the horizontal and I draw it up through the A or B till it hits the efficient frontier curve. And I said, you're exactly right. These portfolios are inefficient. For the same amount of risk, you could get a higher rate of return by repositioning them. I don't know where you are right now with your portfolios, but that's when you give them the risk tolerance questionnaire.
Yeah, and just to throw in the technological side there, many people will use an asset allocation software tool.
Yes.
This is the same kind of thing that you would do with that, right? You'd enter their current portfolio and it'll throw it up on your software, and typically it's not a perfectly balanced portfolio, so it shows up underneath the curve and you can show them, hey, here's your current portfolio, and here's where we would like to get you to increase your rate of return for the given amount of risk. But this is a great piece to do that same kind of presentation just on a white pad, or if you want to take our piece and use that so you have it being more mobile and kind of a go anywhere piece.
Yeah, excellent, Dan. So then what I do then, once I've got that and I explain that in this approach, and what I'll be doing is I'll look at the amount of risk reward they're willing to take after we have them complete the questionnaire, and I'll figure out where their portfolio is. Or as Dan said, if you're using different planning software, you can plug it in right there and pull it up on your monitor and show them. And then down below, I draw out the 4 buckets. And the 4 buckets, obviously, the first bucket is when I reference what we've already talked about, your risk management bucket, bucket 1, protecting those things that you can't afford to lose. In this case, for many of us, unless you're a trust fund baby born with a silver spoon, most of us have to make our own way in this world. And your number one, protect your number one asset, your earning power, your ability to work. So that's bucket 1. Then bucket, if you look at bucket 2 here, or Cornerstone 2, this is going to be, I'm going to label this 0 to 1 years. And I explained to him now what we need to do is, in regard to goal planning here, first, this is your cash reserve bucket, or so what do you need for cash reserves? The rule of thumb, 3 to 6 months. Or what do you need to be able to sleep at night and have a peace of mind? Now, again, use your discretion. Many of you, some people can get their cash reserve by having a line of credit on their setup with their home, etc., so they can get easy access there. Or like Dan, he explained, if you got a pre-retiree like me last year, and then I go into retirement and doing first of this year. What I did is I figured out what with my advisor, what my shortages would be. An example, if I wanted to have $100,000 as income, the average American in retirement's $49,000. So there's 50% above, 50% below. But let's just take arbitrary $100,000. And let's say I'm able to come up with, through Social Security, pension, I'm able to, I've got some consulting fees coming in. I come up to the 70,000. I need to get to 30,000 is my shortage, and that's going to come from whatever distribution strategy you choose. Interest rate, is it 3%, 4%? Work with your advisor on that. That's a topic for another day. But let's say, I need to come up with that 30,000 through my portfolio at earning its, my distribution strategy. But what I wanted to do, the worst thing that can happen to you is have a great recession. I don't know if this one's going to be great. The difference between a recession and a depression, and we've gone over the number of to qualify as a depression. Well, it's a recession when your neighbor's out of work. It's a depression when you're out of work. So, what I've got here is I got to come up with 30,000. So I take that times 2, representing 2 years. That's 60,000. I'm backing out. I'm not going to invest that. and I'm going to put that into this Cornerstone 2, my cash reserves, 0 to 1 year, in this case 0 to 2 in my example, because what I don't want to do is, if you run from a grizzly bear, you're going to get mauled. You run from a bear, you're going to get mauled, that being a bear market. So stop your distributions and use this money that you've set aside. So that's an example of not getting caught swimming naked when the tide goes out. Another tip I would share with you in working with clients here that are going to be retiring, and hopefully you're meeting with them you're all the way along, but the 1 year before retirement, whatever income goal they have, if it's 100,000 in my case, make sure they can live on that for at least 1 year. If not, don't retire or make some adjustments. So I'm just giving you some practical experiences I've personally experienced myself.
Yeah, so on that note, I was just having a conversation yesterday with a friend of mine's mom. He asked me to chat with her about some financial matters that she had going on, and I kind of started talking about emergency funds, and my instinct is exactly like yours, Philip, like 1 to 2 years. And so I was like, oh yeah, you want to have at least 1 year, bare minimum. And she found that super, super conservative. I'm like, really? A whole year? So it also realized that different clients have, just like while saving in retirement, I sometimes get challenged by this from the opposite side. Is a lot of advisors are more aggressive than their clients. I'm typically on the other side. I'm usually way more conservative with my clients' money than they want to be. And I often forget that when I haven't spoken with a client in a while, is that my instinct is to be super, super, super conservative, and not all of them are. So again, as we mentioned before about communicating with your client, ask the client. Don't make that assumption. This goes back to that little trope that I remember from one of my life insurance counterparts when I was wholesaling, that most advisors tend to sell the amount of life insurance that they themselves own, because they think that that's appropriate for everyone, and it's just super self-referential, right? And so same thing, like don't forecast or put your expectations onto the client. Always ask them.
Well, that's a great point, Dan, because it's always, and I hate the word, the generalization, always never, but in this case, I couldn't agree more with you. It's an always, it's the client's goals. And if it's their goals, then it has a big increase in percentage chance of actually sticking, because they own it, versus if it's the advisors. So, so again, staying with bucket 2, Cornerstone 2, however you want to label it. We like Cornerstones. Now that 0 to 1 years, 0 to 2, but then explain, this is money, so when you need it, it's going to be there. And that's one of my roles, not just besides helping you plan for the certainty of the uncertainty, but making sure I place your money in these different cornerstones, or so that when you do need it, it'll be there. In this case, now this sort of money that goes in here, it could be T-bills, it could be savings accounts, it could be CDs, and money markets, but it will be there. It's going to get you a low rate of return, but your principal overall will be safe in this particular cornerstone. Now, other things, it could be, I'll just quick recite, but it could be, hey, maybe they're going to be redoing the kitchen, putting a new roof on. Well, help them figure out, too, with their cash reserve, discretionary income, they might be able to fund it that way as well. So there's a different way of filling this bucket. Now, Cornerstone, which we're going to, 2, now we're going to go to Cornerstone 3. And Cornerstone 3, this is, it can either be 3 to 5 years you label it, or, again, depending, it could be 2 to 5 years. I like 3 to 5. If it's 3 to 5, then I could start, I'll still ask the client, what major purchases or shortfalls are you going to have from an income standpoint in the next 3 to 5 years. And let's find out what that actual dollar amount is. Let's figure out, how they're going to be able to fund that, either with lump sum or can they do it with the discretionary income. And then we talk about different types of investments that we're going to be we could utilize in this area. It could be short-term bonds with short-term maturation periods, depending again about the, how's the bond market looking right now and fixed income market looking. Could be some people I've seen, you could use asset allocation portfolios or a balance fund, etc. But this is, you're going to not be taking as much risk and with this, but it still has an opportunity to stay ahead of inflation and grow for our clients.
All right, that's really the biggest key in this bucket, is that we have shifted away from pure protection to also trying to keep pace with inflation.
Yes.
Right? Because a majority of the portfolio still needs to be growing. Yes, we want to cover that internal risk within the portfolio by having a decent amount of cash allocated, but we also know that we're going to need to continue to grow the portfolio, so we have to keep pace with that.
Beautiful, Dan. And I like to call inflation, that's the silent embezzler, AKA, it's the cost of goods going up in the marketplace. And it's people's number one enemy over the long term.
It's super interesting that 3 to 5 year range is or even 2 to 5 year range. That's right in the range where people really start to understand inflation. As I always told clients, when you get to retirement, you intellectually understand inflation, but you do not emotionally understand it yet.
Correct.
Because you have always been protected by having a job. Either you or your parents have had a job your entire life, and that insulates you from inflation because you are in the economic cycle. I'll talk a little bit more about this in our episode next week, because that's a core part of my income planning strategy that we'll share with you next week. But it's a great point to point this out. It's that time frame is when people are really going to start to understand, hey, this is why I still own equities, is in that 3 to 5 year range where they start to notice, gee, you know what? Things have gone up by 50% in areas where inflation is a little bit higher, healthcare, or things like that, where you have a higher than average inflation rate. So it's super interesting to watch people as they start to really, as I say, emotionally understand that when they have an intellectual understanding of it before.
Beautiful. Now, you tripped a memory recall button for me there. Let's go back to Cornerstone 2, 0 to 1 years. The other reason why putting aside 2 years, typically when we go into a recession, and if you're going into retirement, the worst case scenario for most people is what Dan described happened to me. You hit a recession those first 2 years. It's hard to make it back. But a recession in our country is usually a V, in and out in about 18 to 24 months. So that's why it's nice to have that backed up there, and that amount of money sitting aside in that Cornerstone 2. Now, segueing over to what Dan said, let's go to our, the last cornerstone. That is what I call equities, and that's money that you're not going to need for 5+ years. It's primarily, for most people, it's going to be their retirement money, and as Dan just alluded to, they better have if they're retiring in their 60s, they have a great chance, if they're also, have a partner or spouse, to live to their 90s. And at a 3% inflation, you divide the rules 72, that's 24 years. If you needed 100,000 at 62, 30 years at 92, you're going to need 200,000. So what are you going to be doing with your portfolio to make sure it doubles or triples in retirement? The best hedge against inflation is having ownership, and that type of ownership are equities. So what I do here with my clients, I say this is where we're going to be using that asset allocation. And one thing, I'm going to, I'll do a plan to make sure you don't run out of money, and we'll look at different distribution rates of return we're going to take from this bucket of money to make sure you can meet your income needs and be able to leave a legacy of your choice if that's still something, if they want to do that. then what I educate, because the hardest thing we have to do as advisors and just in life is teach people how to think. So I want to educate them now and I just tell them this, look, here's what I can assure you. In this period of time, we will have ups and downs. Typical business cycles, 3 to 5 years. We've been in a long historical bull market. Now we've hit some rocky grounds here by more headline news in a health crisis. But we'll have crises as well. And when you turn on or that TV or however you're getting your news and you're hearing that announcer, things are bad and they're going to get worse, you're going to call me up. And when you call me up, I'm going to ask, I'm going to say, okay, let's talk about bucket, our bucket or Cornerstones. And Cornerstone 2, did the money do exactly what we said it was going to do? Yeah, it's going to be there. The principle hasn't changed. It's still there. You're getting a rate of return. You're still going to be able to do the things you want to do that we identified where this money is going to be spent. Did bucket in 3 or Cornerstone 3 do what we said it was going to do? Yes. It didn't go down nearly as much, though, as the Dow Jones, what you've been hearing about, the S&P 500 or the NASDAQ. And it's still primarily going to be there. As a matter of fact, boom, it went down X, and here's what the market has done against these indexes. And it's still, you're still going to be able to cover your goals during this time period. And recite, how long a recession typically lasts as well. So you got to be fact-based at this time.
But bottom line is you're going back to a plan that you have discussed with the client, and you are showing them essentially exactly what you had planned for is now happening, and here's how we're going to react. And all of this has been explained, and just think about how reassuring that is to the client in an uncertain time to be able to go back to that plan, connect those dots. Here's your goal. Here's the plan. Has anything changed? No. Okay, we don't need to panic and move on. That is exactly how this should work.
Exactly. And then your Cornerstone 4, or if you want to call it bucket 4, that's all up to you. You can use your own terminology. This is what we just use. Did it do exactly what I said it was going to do? Yes, it didn't go down nearly as much. One of my key roles is to protect you for on the downside. And that we have done because we've used your asset allocation model based upon your risk tolerance. And you're not going to need this money for X number of years. And if you want, what I'd recommend you do, if you've done planning here, which we're big advocates of, if the client's on the phone with you, pull up their plan, enter whatever the portfolio is right now, its value, and rerun their goals. Let them know if they're still going to be okay or not okay. I bet, that's a long period of time out, they'll probably be okay.
And this is the bottom line as well in every discussion I have with the do-it-yourself DIY investor about, look, saving for retirement, yeah, if you want to spend the time, it's not rocket science. You can learn the principles of saving are pretty straightforward. Now, you do have to dedicate some time to it and learn about things like asset classes and asset allocation. But, the average person, if they want to spend time doing that, they can learn how to do that, right? You don't have to hire somebody to do that. Now, we're going to have arguments and discussions about behaviorally, like I was with my initial anecdote. Once you get to a certain level and you start seeing that fluctuation in thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars, it becomes much harder to manage your own emotions. So we can talk about that in a later episode. But the bottom line here is income planning is a total different animal. When you get to retirement, it is not as simple. It is much more of an art than a science, and that's what we're trying to do here with this 4 Cornerstone concept, is just give you some ideas around, how do we create this, income plan, because you are no longer a buy and hold investor when you are in retirement. I call you transition into what I call the hold and must sell investor. Yep. And having a plan for how that's going to work operationally is vitally important to keeping your clients. You can't just go back and into the saving mantra of just hold on to everything and it'll come back, because they don't have that. They don't have that ability to wait. They have to have that income. So
what you just described here, and to our audience, this this discussion and exercise that you have with your clients by separating their portfolios into these distinct cornerstones, it helps them think of their money in this way. And some planners may use this concept and have their clients, actually what I found is they say, they get calls, hey, I got some bucket 4 money. I have some Cornerstone 4 money. I have 50,000. Can I send it in? I'm not going to need it for 5+ years. And what this does, it might sound hokey, but it allows your clients, bottom line, you've educated them, so and you've taken their needs and matched them up with what you were saying, with their emotions to each one of these cornerstones. And that's where you can also, if they do call you, you can start with the 4 R's that we referenced in the other ones.
Yeah, excellent. And that's a great point to remind me of. We've mentioned the 4 R's in terms of communicating with clients in the last few episodes. So we put together that piece, and that's going to be out on our website, value-ability.com. Click on the episodes tab, and it'll have a link to all of our content for episode 3. And there is going to be the questions to use when using the 4 R's. We've referenced that a number of times in the last few episodes, so we wanted to get that out to you. So with that, we are going to transition into our article and section. And this week we decided to go with choose an article that isn't just me being angry about something and try to use something a little bit more targeted and useful. So this week we are using an article called 6 Moves Advisors Should Be Recommending for Their Clients Right Now. And I'm just going to run through those really quickly. Sure. So number 1, rebalance. Number 2, tax loss harvesting. Number 3, get rid of the dogs. Number 4, reframe what the stock market is. Number 5, lead by example. And number 6, most interestingly, prepare to be fired. And I would also add to that, prepare to fire, right?
Yeah,
so
point.
It's not just the people that can't manage with you. It's the people that aren't listening to you during the crisis as well. You need to focus in on. So what were your main thoughts on this article, Si?
Well, 4, 5, and 6, we really dealt with them, what the market really is. We helped with that today by explaining these cornerstones and educating your client. 6, I was working with, Melissa. I won't say her last name, yesterday. And the last bit you said, get ready to fire some of your clients. And unfortunately, you have to do that. And then we kicked this whole thing off on, the Merrill Lynch study. Are you going to be chosen or frozen? You got to be proactive and reach out to those clients. Otherwise, they're going to fire you. And we've got those different tools you've put out there, emails that they could send or letters as well. So that's what my thoughts were. And what I've also experienced with the 62 years around the sun, the stock market in the United States goes up about 70% of all trading days. It even closes higher on about 40% of trading days in a bear market. Looked another way, it goes up 4 out of 5 years. So don't panic. They need to see you working for them right now, and by some of these examples of these 6 examples you just shared.
Yeah, and I think focusing in, I think the ones that we haven't focused in on the most are the first 3. So, tactical rebalancing of the portfolio. You've mentioned it a couple of times, but we haven't really gotten into that. it is a great time to sit down and look at, which are the asset classes that are outperforming in this current market and which are underperforming, and making some adjustments to that. If you're using the Cornerstone, type of approach as well, you're going to be draining likely the Cornerstone 2, right? You're going to be draining that cash account. So over the coming, months and up to a year, you're going to need to be looking at ways to start replenishing that when you get to your next review. So always keep that rebalancing in mind as well. It's not just asset rebalancing, but also within those buckets, within those cornerstones, you want to be thinking about rebalancing. Tax loss harvesting, definitely want to take a look at that. Contact their accountants, have them reach out to their accountants, or if you work directly with their accountants, touch base with them, find out what type of tax losses they could use going forward, and take a look within the portfolio. That's definitely a making lemonade out of lemons conversation, but that's the kind of tactical thing that you get hired to do in addition to the behavioral and the planning things. Can't forget about the on the ground tactical things as well. And then, getting rid of the dogs. Bottom line is, if you're getting emotionally tied to investments, a lot of times people do that. They get emotionally tied to certain things. Now is the time to say, hey, you know what? This thing has been underperforming, and now we're in a market where it's performing even worse. We really need to take a look at just changing this entire investment out and going with something that's going to be better suited going forward. So you can make some even larger changes. It's not really a rebalance. It's actually looking at each individual investment on its own merits and deciding, is there something better within this type that we can replace it with? So we will put that out on our website as well. Click on value-ability.com. Under the episodes tab, we'll have a link to that article, and we will also share it on our Twitter feed at value_ability. And while you're on our Twitter feed, shoot us a tweet. Let us know, what things are you recommending to clients right now? Are there any specific tactical things that you're doing with clients that we're missing? So let us know what you are doing out there that we have not been discussing. So now we're going to transition into our question section. Got 2 questions this week. First one, what are some money-saving tips to help me and my family get through the current COVID-19 pandemic while not working? So I'll start off with this one. The first thing I always talk about when we go through a situation like this is expense management. Now, this is extreme for some people. Like, expense management is a huge deal. It was one of my mantras talking to people getting close to retirement. I'm like, look, it's not income management. The income management side, while, fairly complicated, isn't as important as managing your expenses. Like, you have absolute control over managing a big chunk of your expenses, and that is where you can make really, really, really important choices. And for many people, this may be the first time in your life that you don't have an income while you've been in your work, since you've stopped being a kid, since you stopped living in your parents' house. And it is a different world. The first thing you have to do is take a look at every single expense and get rid of the things that are not absolutely necessary to live, but then B, look, there are going to be some expenses that you need so that you're not just sitting in your house twiddling your thumbs, right? Like I'm saying, like you can have a Netflix account, right? But I actually sat down and I had 3 streaming accounts, and I realized this in the last couple of weeks, that I had these 2 other streaming accounts I had bought to watch this one show, and they're still just sitting there churning away, charging me $10 a month. And so I got rid of those. So you need to sit down, take a look at your expenses, pare down all of your expenses. But then there's also a silent one on the other side, which is the other thing about being in a situation where you're not working is, and I learned this when I took some time away 2 or 3 years ago, you spend a lot more money when you're not working all day. So to stop yourself from going online and shopping and ordering things off of Amazon, you absolutely need to find something to do. Whether it's a hobby that you need to resurrect or a hobby that you're currently doing that you need to, re-engage with and expand, you need to get yourself something to do. Yep, sitting around watching some Netflix episodes is great, but you need to stay active mentally, stay active physically. So find something that you can do to occupy your time.
And Dan, I'll just add a couple thoughts. One, if you practice the 4 Cornerstone philosophy and look at Cornerstone number 2, 0 to 1 years, your cash reserves, that's that cornerstone. When you have situations like this going forward, you won't be in as much turmoil emotionally. So 2, I think it was our first one. If you practice the principle of 70, 20, 30 with whatever you make, 70% of it, if you made $10, let's say, just an example, $7 you're going to live on, or 70%, whatever you bring in on an annual basis, that's what you're going to live on. 20% you're going to use that for filling up Cornerstone 3 and or replenishing Cornerstone 2, and then 10% of whatever you make that goes into Cornerstone 4, 5+ years. Take those lessons. You might be caught with your pants down and you're swimming naked on this crisis, but going forward, make sure you capture those key learnings and change the behavior.
Yeah, awesome. That's a great point in that, I think traditionally of the Cornerstone concept as a retirement income, but it really is an income management process that you can use throughout someone's life. So even for younger folks, you could be implementing this process because it could be useful for situations like this going forward. Now, hopefully we won't see a crisis where so many people are experiencing lack of employment so quickly, but certainly individual clients will go through periods where they will lose employment. So it definitely will help cover those younger clients as well. So question number 2, when stocks start rising after this bear market, should I buy as soon as they start rising or before they rise at all? And this was the question I mentioned or referenced in my opening anecdote that made me think about that experience where I was 3 months after the bottom and still thinking that worse could come down the pipe. And that's my initial response to this question is, look, when the market's down, right? You go to the store and you see the proverbial tuna on sale. Your first thought isn't, is it going to go down on a bigger sale next week? No, you buy some tuna because it's on sale, right? So anytime on the way down, on the way back up, if it's on sale, it's on sale. It's a good time to buy. That's my initial response. But remember, it's just really hard to even make that determination. Is it on its way down? Is it on its way back up? So, if you've got people that want to put money in, put a chunk in, hold a chunk back in case there are further opportunities in other areas. And it might be, like you mentioned earlier, Philip, an individual stock opportunity where a certain industry is fluctuating for certain reasons.
On sale right now,
where you get to deploy that. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, history has told me timing the market is a fool's game. Warren Buffett can't do it. Peter Lynch, one of the great Magellan Fund portfolio managers for Fidelity, one of the great money managers of all time, he said far more money is lost by investors preparing for corrections or trying to anticipate corrections than have been lost in a correction. Or you hear, I've got to wait till the election's over, or I got to see, when this market's finally going to be turning. I've got to, if you've got many of them, you are already dollar cost averaging in, you're buying cheap shares right now. Keep doing it in your 401k. Do not stop. Do not take money out of that 401k that they're going to allow to help you meet these needs. That would be that'd be my last resort. If you can, Dan, just what you said, use the catch-up rule. If you're in your 50s with for retirement, I'd take advantage of this and then take a look at some great dividend plays right now with some big blue chips.
Excellent. So with that, following on to our other request, what are some suggestions that you are offering to clients right now? Not in the tactical realm like we mentioned before, but what things are you recommending to clients to help them manage their emotions, money saving tips, things to keep busy? It could be portfolio or plan related as well. So reach out to us on our Twitter feed at value_ability, or you can find us on our website, value-ability.com. Click on the Contact Us tab, and you can submit a form. While you're there, if you have topics that you would like us to cover or questions for us to cover in our question section, submit them there, value-ability.com on the Contact Us tab. While you're there, sign up for our mailing list. It's right there at the top of that page. Wherever you find us, like, review, subscribe, and share. Always have to ask for that. And next episode, we are going to cover a kind of different planning concept, many related themes, but just a slightly different take on how to manage a client's portfolio when it comes to approaching retirement. And I call that the need, fun, love strategy, and we'll cover that next week. As always, thank you for listening. Join us next week, and remember that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. This is a podcast collaboration, not a peer-reviewed journal or a sponsored publication. We make no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this podcast, and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information, or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. It is the listener's responsibility to verify their own facts. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on this podcast. Strategies or investments discussed may fluctuate in price or value. Investors may get back less than invested. Investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. You must make an independent decision regarding investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast. Before acting on information on this podcast, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances and strongly consider seeking advice from your own financial or investment advisor. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Assumptions are not reflective of the position of any entity other than the authors, and since we are critically thinking human beings, these views are always subject to change, revision, and rethinking at any time. Please do not hold us to them in perpetuity.